The room was already tense, but the words came like the crack of a gavel. "That'll be enough." Ms. Crockett, Judge Amy Coney Barrett, snapped, her voice slicing through the chamber with chilling precision. The air shifted instantly. Conversations halted. Pens froze, mid-scribble. Every pair of eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett, seated at the table, her hands clasped but her eyes steady. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. For a heartbeat, even the air seemed afraid to move. It wasn't just a procedural interruption. It was a command designed to shrink her, to box her in, to remind her who was supposed to hold the authority in this room. But something about the force of Barrett's words made the audience lean forward instead of back. Across the rows of onlookers, expressions told a story of their own. Some looked stunned, mouths slightly agape. Others smirked, sensing blood in the water. Cameras clicked in quick bursts, capturing a moment that felt like a fracture line in real time. And there, at the center of it, Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Did she just try to silence her? The question rippled in the minds of everyone present, an echo bouncing off the walls. A judge, a symbol of ultimate authority, had just cut down a congresswoman mid-sentence. And yet, in that very act of silencing, Barrett had sparked something far louder than her own words: outrage, disbelief, the collective gasp of those who knew what it meant to be told they were speaking out of turn. Barrett leaned back, expression cool, her tone leaving no room for discussion. But in her composure, there was an unmistakable edge and arrogance, a certainty that the exchange was over. The imbalance of power was unmistakable. One cloaked in robes of authority, the other, a black woman, unafraid to challenge that authority. For a moment, it seemed the weight of the gavel had won. Crockett's lips parted, but she did not speak. The silence grew unbearable, like the pause before a storm breaks. And then, in that quiet, something shifted. Her posture changed. The flicker of resolve lit her face, and the room braced itself. Because what came next was not retreat, it was not submission. Crockett's response was nothing anyone expected. This was not just a procedural clash between a judge and a congresswoman. It was a collision of symbols to figures standing on opposite sides of America's deepest divides. In Barrett's voice, sharp and clipped, many heard the weight of centuries, the tone used to remind women of their place, the quiet dismissal of black voices that dared to speak with force, the unspoken assumption that authority belonged to those who already had it. In Crockett's silence, in her unbroken gaze, there was something else entirely. It wasn't retreat. It was calculation. Barrett's reputation was built on cold precision. She carried herself as if she were above the noise of politics, a jurist. Draped in the solemnity of law, her words carefully measured to strike without showing sweat. To her supporters, she was unflappable. To her critics, she was detached, distant, the embodiment of an ivory tower disguised as impartiality. And here in this moment, she had turned that detachment into a weapon. Cutting Crockett down as if her words were an inconvenience rather than testimony. But Jasmine Crockett was not the kind of figure who folded under pressure. She had earned her stripes as a fearless defender of the voiceless, an advocate unafraid of messy fights. Where Barrett projected distance, Crockett thrived in closeness, connecting to the struggles of everyday people. Drawing fire from those threatened by her refusal to be silent. Her reputation preceded her, a woman unshaken by power, unwilling to let authority dictate her dignity. The imbalance in that chamber could not be ignored. On one side, a Supreme Court justice with the full weight of her robe and reputation. On the other, a congresswoman whose every word was scrutinized, often doubted, often diminished before it left her lips. Yet the very imbalance of power was what made the moment electrifying. It was more than a clash of personalities. It was a microcosm of the broader struggle, race against privilege, gender against patriarchy, representation against the fortress of established power. And it mattered not just for the outcome of that trial, but for every woman who had ever been told to sit down, for every immigrant who had been dismissed as unworthy, for every person whose voice was cut short by those who believed authority equaled truth. Barrett's attempt to silence Crockett was not just about the words spoken, it was about sending a message. But messages, once delivered, don't always land the way they're intended. Sometimes they ignite something else entirely. The cameras caught it all. Barrett's rebuke, Crockett's unshaken stare, the atmosphere shifting like a drumbeat waiting to drop. Social media feeds were already buzzing. Clips spread before the gavel struck again. Each second analyzed, replayed, dissected. Did she just shut her down? One tweet read. Another shot back. No, she woke her up. The nation wasn't just watching. It was bracing. This wasn't going to be forgotten in a news cycle. It had already broken free from the four walls of the chamber. It was bigger than one trial, bigger than one dispute. It was about whether the stage of justice could still hold space for those who had always been told it wasn't theirs. And at the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, silent for a moment longer, gathering herself. Because if Barrett thought the silence was victory, she was mistaken. The rebuke had only set the table. What came next would not only flip the narrative inside the courtroom, it would ripple outward, far beyond. Into every corner where people waited for someone to finally stand up and answer back. Asterisk. Amy Coney Barrett's rise to power was nothing short of meteoric. From the polished halls of Notre Dame to the marble chambers of the Supreme Court, she carried herself with the poise of someone destined to sit above others. To her admirers, she was the perfect image of order, disciplined, articulate, seemingly immune to the storms of politics. Her confirmation hearings had been a performance in restraint, calm under fire, untouchable in her demeanor, the picture of composure even. When the questions turned searing, she earned the nickname Unshakable Justice, a woman who would not be rattled by critics or dissent, but polished images often hide the cracks beneath. For all her composure, Barrett projected something else too: distance. Her rulings were written with surgical precision, yes, but also with a detachment that left those affected by them feeling invisible. To the families who lived on the edge of those decisions, the immigrants fearing deportation, the women fighting for autonomy, the workers challenging corporations, her words read like cold stone, elegant but unfeeling. Where others saw impartiality, critics saw elitism. She had been groomed for this role. Raised in a tight-knit, conservative Catholic community, Barrett's worldview was shaped by traditions of obedience, hierarchy, and discipline. She excelled in academia, her intellect undeniable, her commitment to a rigid interpretation of the law unwavering. When she stepped onto the national stage, she did so with the aura of inevitability, a justice who spoke softly but carried immense weight. Her supporters praised her humility, her regular mom image, her 7 children paraded as proof of groundedness. Yet even in that carefully crafted portrait, there was an undeniable power play. She was both ordinary and untouchable, relatable, yet unreachable. And those who tried to reach her, those who pressed too hard, spoke too boldly, or refused to bow to her authority, soon found themselves staring into the chill of her restraint. Barrett's greatest strength was her ability to say less and mean more. With a raised eyebrow, a clipped phrase, a measured pause, she could dismantle an argument without ever appearing ruffled. It was this very demeanor that made her revered in elite circles. It was also what made her feared. Yet fear can curdle into resentment. To her critics, Barrett embodied a quiet arrogance, kind that does not shout but silences. She represented not just a judge, but the architecture of power itself, polished, protected, and rarely questioned to her face. She was the gatekeeper in the grand hall of justice, and she carried herself with the certainty that the gate would never swing open unless she allowed it. This is what made her clash with Jasmine Crockett so combustible. Barrett had spent her career mastering the art of control. She didn't argue in anger. She dismissed with calm. She didn't flail. She froze others with precision. But in that very mastery lay her blind spot. By leaning so heavily on silence, detachment, and the projection of authority, she underestimated the force of those who thrived on connection. On raw honesty, on speaking truths that cut deeper than polished language ever could. Her cold treatment of challengers was not new. In her courtroom and beyond, She had a habit of minimizing dissent with a wave of formality. Those who spoke with passion, she met with stoicism. Those who dared confront her authority, she met with carefully veiled disdain. Again and again, the tactic worked. People backed down. Voices softened. The unshakable justice remained unshaken. But power, when wielded without empathy, begins to corrode its own foundation. Each clipped rebuke, each moment of dismissal, each ruling that prioritized doctrine over dignity, all built a reputation of distance, of elitism, of someone untouchable but increasingly out of touch. And so, when Barrett's cold rebuke rang out against Jasmine Crockett, it was not just another interruption. It was the distillation of everything she had become: polished, powerful, but so distant that she no longer recognized the fire of those she tried to silence. She believed her restraint would be enough, that her authority would end the moment before it began. She believed silence and control were unbreakable shields, but arrogance has a way of setting its own trap. It's the very qualities that built Barrett's reputation, her detachment, her composure, her air of inevitability were the same qualities that made her vulnerable to someone who refused to play by those rules, because silence only works when the other side accepts it. Control only matters when no one dares to resist. And Amy Coney Barrett, for all her years of carefully cultivated authority, had never stood across from someone who thrived on confrontation, who refused to shrink, who could meet her icy detachment with blazing defiance. But while Barrett built her career on silence and control, she'd never faced someone like Crockett,